I'm strolling down a quiet London street on one of those dreary, drizzly mornings that make the entire city feel like it's wrapped in a damp, gray cocoon. My thoughts, as usual, are wandering. At 65, I've spent 40 years married to Walter. Sweet, dependable, endlessly kind Walter. And don't get me wrong, nice is, well, nice. But nice doesn't make your pulse quicken. Nice doesn't leave you breathless. Nice is simply there. And lately, I've been wondering, does just being ever feel like enough? Lost in my own musings, my practical shoes tapping softly against the pavement, my gaze lands on someone ahead. A young man, early 20s at most, lounging against a weathered brick wall with the kind of effortless confidence that makes it seem like he owns the place. His hair is a tousled mess, his leather jacket worn and fraying at the edges, and then, oh God, is he? He is, right there, in public, without a hint of shame. Whistling, completely unfazed, as he relieves himself against the wall. I freeze, my brain momentarily short-circuiting. My first instinct should be disgust. I should cross the street, pretend not to see, maybe shoot him a stern, disapproving look. But instead, my feet keep moving, carrying me toward him. Why? I have no idea. Maybe it's the sheer audacity of it. Maybe it's how he looks like he belongs in some gritty indie film, the kind where everyone smokes in dimly lit alleys and nothing ever resolves neatly. Or maybe it's because, for the first time in longer than I care to admit, I feel something other than nice. I'm only a few steps away when I speak, my voice quiet, almost as if testing the air. "Excuse me," he startles, zipping up in record time. His eyes snap to mine, wide at first like a child caught sneaking sweets, then quickly narrowing into something amused, assessing, and then he smirks. "Sorry, my bad," he says, voice low, a little rough at the edges, and here's the part I can't quite explain. I don't avert my gaze. I hold it longer than I should, longer than is remotely appropriate. There's something about him, the way he carries himself, unbothered and sure, the way he doesn't really apologize, not like he means it, the way he looks at me, curiosity flickering beneath the smirk. It's exhilarating, it's wrong, and it's thrilling because it's wrong. Eventually, I force myself to keep walking, my heart beating just a little faster than before. What the hell was that? And before you start judging me, let me be clear. I'm not some restless woman prowling for adventure. I'm a grown adult who has spent 4 decades in a life that's been fine, just fine. But for the rest of my walk home, my mind keeps circling back to him, to the way he leaned against that wall, to the way he smirked like he was in on some private joke, to his hands. No, stop it, Eleanor. By the time I step through my front door, Walter greets me the same way he always does. "Hey, Eleanor, where have you been?" "Just out for my walk," I reply, slipping off my coat and draping it over a chair. Breakfast is waiting, scrambled eggs, toast, coffee, his usual sweet gesture, one I appreciate. I really do. But as I sit down, something stirs in me, something I can't quite name. Not guilt, not exactly, more like amusement. Because while Walter carefully drizzles honey into his tea, I'm thinking about a young man's hands pressed against a brick wall. Silly, my heart is being ridiculous. Walter leans in and kisses my forehead before heading off to work, and the moment the door closes behind him, I do what any perfectly respectable woman in my position would do. I spend the afternoon looking at pictures of attractive men online. Harmless, just a bit of fun, a little visual indulgence never hurt anyone. But the next morning, that's when things take an interesting turn. Out on my walk again, rounding the same corner, and, oh, for God's sake, same guy, same spot, same activity. My steps slow, my gaze locking onto him before he even notices me. Now I could turn around, I could keep moving, ignore him, pretend I never saw a thing. But where's the fun in that? Hands tucked in my coat pockets, I step closer, voice casual, teasing. "You've really got a favorite spot, don't you?" His head jerks up, startled. Another hurried zip. "Damn," he mutters, shaking his head. "Busted again." A beat of silence, then he smirks. This is weird, feels like déjà vu. Maybe the Matrix is glitching, and I laugh. A real unrestrained laugh, the kind that bubbles up before you even realize it's coming. Flirting. I was flirting with a man I just caught doing that. What the hell is wrong with me? I shake my head and walk away, brushing off the encounter as a ridiculous little moment in an otherwise predictable morning. My house is just a few doors down, and before stepping inside, I pause in my front yard, crouching to inspect my plants. One of the leaves is riddled with tiny holes. Caterpillars, probably. I sigh, running my fingers over it, and that's when I feel it. Eyes on me. I glance up, and there he is. Walking past my house, hands in his pockets, he spots me and stops short. Oh, you live here? I straighten, brushing the dirt from my fingers. What, you thought I just wandered the streets looking for men with interesting habits? He lets out a short chuckle, but I'm not finished. Stepping just a little closer, I lower my voice, tilting my head slightly. You again, I said with a smirk. I hope this isn't becoming a habit. His smirk falters. Yeah? I nod, keeping my expression unreadable. Just wondering how a man like you manages when there's no wall to lean against. His mouth parts slightly, and for a moment he's speechless. I smile, sweet, knowing, just enough. And then he exhales a quiet laugh, raking a hand through his already messy hair. Damn, you're dangerous. I shrug, feigning nonchalance. Only to men with bad aim and small bladders. That gets him. A real surprised laugh, deep, amused, like he isn't used to being the one thrown off balance. All right, he says, still chuckling. In my defense, sometimes nature calls at inconvenient times. I tap my chin thoughtfully. Or maybe you just like an audience. His jaw drops slightly, and this time he doesn't recover quite as fast. But then, another laugh, this one shaking his head. You're something else, lady. Eleanor, I correct, smirking now. Since we're apparently on such familiar terms. He repeats it, rolling my name over his tongue like he's testing it out. Eleanor, he says, nice to meet you, officially. I'm Leo. Just as the words left his mouth, the front door swung open. Walter. His timing was nothing short of impeccable. Walter's gaze flicked between us, his brow lifting slightly. To his credit, Leo recovered quickly, stepping back with an easy smirk. Well, he said, hands sliding into his pockets, guess I'll be seeing you around. Oh, I'm sure you will, I replied, my voice smooth, almost too sweet. He chuckled, shaking his head as if unsure what to make of me, before turning on his heel and strolling away. Walter's eyes followed him, a faint crease forming on his forehead. Then, turning back to me, he asked, Who was that? I waved a dismissive hand. Oh, just some young man asking for change. Walter frowned slightly. Didn't look homeless. I shrugged. You know how young men are these days, always in need of something. That seemed to satisfy him. Of course it did. Walter was steady, dependable, a good man, but I was starting to wonder, was I missing something, or had I simply forgotten how to look for it? Inside the house, I caught him watching me over the rim of his coffee cup, his gaze lingering a little too long. There was something hopeful in his eyes, something that made me sigh internally. We ended up in the bedroom. He was eager, like a child unwrapping a birthday gift when he already knew exactly what was inside. And it was fine, nice, predictable. Afterward, I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, my mind elsewhere. Walter and I had fallen into a rhythm, predictable, comforting, but I couldn't help but wonder, was it enough? I needed something else, something forbidden, something raw and dangerous. And ever since I'd met Leo, the way he carried himself, rugged and careless, I couldn't stop thinking about him. It was wrong, but somehow it felt right. The next morning I stepped out for my usual walk, a hum of anticipation buzzing beneath my skin. Would he be there again? Would we have another fleeting, ridiculous, charged little encounter? But as I reached the corner, there was nothing. just an empty street, quiet and still. I lingered for a moment, pretending to adjust my shoe, subtly glancing around. Still nothing. Fine. I wasn't waiting for him. That would be absurd. I turned back toward home, though I didn't go inside right away. Instead, I crouched near my plants, fingertips grazing the leaves, stretching out the moment. And then, movement. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him, Leo, walking down the street, heading in my direction. But this time he didn't stop at his usual spot. Interesting. I smirked, fingers tightening around the water bottle in my hand as he passed by. "Hey, Eleanor," he greeted, slowing his pace. "How's it going?" I leaned casually against the fence, eyes twinkling. "Not relieving yourself on public property today?" He stopped mid-step, eyes widening before he burst into laughter. I lifted my water bottle, extending it toward him. "Here, stay hydrated." Still grinning, he shook his head, but took it from me. "Wow, didn't realize you enjoyed the show." I arched an eyebrow. "I was merely concerned about your health. 8 glasses a day, you know." He twisted off the cap, bringing the bottle to his lips, taking a slow sip while keeping his eyes on me. "So thoughtful of you." "I try," I said, all sweetness. His gaze lingered, intrigued now. "So, Eleanor, do you always hand out water to strange men, or just the ones who make a strong first impression?" I tapped my chin as if pondering. "Only the ones with bad habits." "That right?" He took another sip, the corner of his mouth quirking up. "And you? Always this charming to strangers?" Oh, he was catching on now. I stepped in just slightly, lowering my voice. "A few?" His Leo's apple bobbed. "Yeah?" I smirked. "So bad, I doubt you'd be able to handle them." A quiet chuckle escaped him, his head tilting as he watched me. "That so?" I turned, walking toward my front door, tossing a glance over my shoulder. "I was about to make some coffee. You look like you could use some." He hesitated, glancing down the street like he was debating it. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "What's the matter? Scared of a little breakfast?" That did it. He exhaled sharply, then shrugged. "What the hell?" Stepping past me, he entered the house. I closed the door behind him. In the kitchen, I reached for a knife and a few onions, sliding them across the counter. "Here," I said, handing him the knife. He eyed it, amused. Didn't realize I was being put to work. I leaned in slightly, watching as he wrapped his fingers around the handle. "Oh, it's not work," I murmured. "I just want to get your flavor in the food, that's all." His hand stilled mid-chop. He glanced at me, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Amusement, intrigue, maybe something darker. I held his gaze, biting back a smile. We moved around the kitchen with an unexpected ease, as though we'd done this 100 times before. At one point, I reached for the spatula, guiding his hand over the handle with mine. "Like this," I whispered. He tensed briefly, then relaxed as we stirred the food together, my hand resting over his. Neither of us spoke. By the time we sat down to eat, there was a different kind of hunger in the air. After breakfast, I grabbed 2 beers from the fridge, tossing one to him. He caught it effortlessly, brow lifting. "Morning beer? Now who's the bad influence?" I clinked my bottle against his. "You'll survive." We moved to the lounge, standing close, the space between us thick with unspoken things. I took a slow sip, eyes gleaming. "Netflix and chill?" He exhaled a small laugh, raking a hand through his already messy hair. "I should probably head out." I raised an eyebrow. "Why?" He scratched the back of his neck, hesitant. "Your husband." I waved a hand dismissively. "He won't be back until evening." I watched his hesitation, savoring it. Another test. "You don't have any other engagements, do you?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. He hesitated, then exhaled and shook his head. "No, not as such." Grabbing a blanket, I draped it over myself before lifting one side, patting the empty space beside me. "Get in." His grip tightened around his beer, his fingers tapping against the bottle. I arched an eyebrow. "Scared of a little warmth?" A slow smirk crept across his lips, and then, finally, he sat down. The blanket shifted as he pulled it over his legs, the space between us suddenly feeling very, very small. This was going to be interesting. I scrolled through the movie options deliberately before settling on one. The screen flickered to life, casting a dim glow over us. I nestled deeper into the blanket, my body just barely brushing against his. The film, a story about an older woman and a younger man. Fitting. As the scenes unfolded, I let my gaze drift to him, a glance here, a lingering look there. I caught the way he shifted in his seat, rolling his shoulders, adjusting his position like he was trying not to react. Biting back a smirk, I let the moment stretch. Then, as the film reached a particularly steamy scene, I leaned in and whispered, "What do you think?" He cleared his throat. "About what?" I tilted my head slightly, feigning innocence. "The dynamic?" He let out a short, nervous laugh before taking a sip of his beer. "It's interesting." I let the silence settle between us for a beat, then added, "Do you think the older women are taking advantage?" He glanced at me, then smirked. "Maybe it's the other way around." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh? You think the young men are the real masterminds?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Wouldn't surprise me." I leaned in just a little more. "And you? If you were in their place?" His jaw tensed for a split second before he forced a smirk. "I think I'd be just fine." A small, amused hum escaped me. "Oh? That confident?" His hand ran through his hair, and suddenly he seemed very aware of how close we were under this blanket. I stretched lazily, just enough for my thigh to barely graze his. "You're squirming," I teased, sipping my beer. He scoffed. "I'm not squirming." I let my gaze drop slowly, deliberately, before meeting his eyes again. A muscle in his jaw twitched. I grinned, watching him try to play it cool. This was fun. Tracing the rim of my beer bottle with my fingertip, I said, "Tell me something." He raised an eyebrow. "What?" I bit my lip, pretending to think. "If an older woman were to, let's say, take an interest in a younger man, what do you think she'd be looking for?" His smirk faltered slightly. He knew what I was doing. I watched his throat move as he swallowed, his voice dipping just a little lower. "Well, I guess she'd want someone who knows exactly what she needs, even before she does." I nodded slowly. "Go on." He exhaled through his nose, glancing briefly at the screen before his eyes locked back onto mine. "Someone who doesn't just see her, but feels her, in all the ways she's been craving." A slow warmth curled through me. I tilted my head, smiling. "That's a good answer." He finally turned to me fully, holding my gaze. "Yeah?" I met his stare, then took another slow sip of my beer. "Yeah." The tension between us thickened, heavy with things left unsaid. The movie played on, but neither of us were watching it anymore. I leaned in closer, my heart pounding but my movements steady. And I didn't hesitate. I kissed him. He tensed for a fraction of a second, caught off guard. But then, just like that, the floodgates opened. His hand brushed against mine, a fleeting touch, but enough to send a shiver through me. I inhaled sharply, startled by the unexpected electricity in the moment. I shouldn't be doing this. I knew that. But I didn't care. It was wild, messy, the kind of thing I had forgotten how to feel. We sat there, too close, too comfortable, the silence stretching between us. It would have been easy to blur the lines. Too easy for a long moment we just lay there, catching our breath. And then reality tapped on my shoulder. I stood, smoothing down my sweater. Well, that's enough excitement for one morning. I laughed, but my heart was still racing. He blinked, still dazed. "What?" I grabbed his shirt off the floor and tossed it at him. Now, before Walter. A slow, cocky grin spread across his face. "Scared of getting caught?" I narrowed my eyes. "I'm serious. Get moving." He pulled on his shirt, standing up and running a hand through his messy hair. Before stepping out the door, he turned back, eyes flicking over me with something between amusement and satisfaction. "See you around, Eleanor." And then he was gone. I exhaled sharply, fixing the couch, smoothing my hair, taking a deep breath. And just as I composed myself, the front door creaked open. Walter. I turned, forcing my voice to sound perfectly normal. Walter, he smiled, completely unaware. Hey, sweetheart. I smiled back, my stomach still flipping from what had just happened. As Walter smiled at me, I smiled back, settling into the moment. Just another day, but maybe not quite the same as before.